Is there anything you so detest or something you consider so harmful to people, society, the environment, that even if you could invest profitably in it, you wouldn't want to? Or is there anything you so yearn to see advanced, so long to see become more true in our world, something you consider so necessary or beneficial that you would want to invest in it even if it meant you might receive a lower financial return? Have you ever wondered how hard it would be actually to build a portfolio that matches your values this way? And are you convinced you'd have to sacrifice returns? Today, we begin by discussing what is today variously called sustainable investing, or ESG investing, meaning investing using environmental, social, and governance criteria. What it is, how to use it, and what it might mean for you. All that and more right now on the Retirement Lifestyle Show.
Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm your co-host, Roshan Loungani. I'm here as usual with Erik Olson and Adrian Nicholson, and we've got an important topic today. We're going to talk about ESG investing, and ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. It's a subset of a larger topic of value-based investing, and we think this is very important because gives you as an investor an opportunity to have your dollars speak for you. You can invest in areas where you want to see improvement in the world, in society, however you'd like, but you can take your dollars and have them vote for you. It reminds me of an old Benjamin Graham saying where he used to say the stock market is a weighing machine in the long run, but in the short run, it's a voting machine. And this is just a way to take some of your dollars and you can back up and support some things that are still investments, but help move society along the way that you would like. I've got with me, as usual, Erik Olson and Adrian Nicholson. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Roshan. I'm happy to be here. I really like their intro into ESG today. I'm very excited about the topic. It's a new conversation investors are starting to have today. Again, like you say, having their dollars and their assets kind of invested and reflecting their values and beliefs. So I think it's going to be a great discussion today. Erik, how are you today? Are you excited about the topic like I am?
I'm excited about the topic. It's a good one. And Roshan, you were kind to ask us how we're doing. What's up for you?
Oh, nothing too major. I did get a dose of the vaccine today. So
oh, really?
A step closer to getting back into the office. And every time I say back to normal, I think everyone sort of shudders a little bit in terms of the new normal is the term everyone tends to use. But for me, the simple things like getting back to the office and having my wife go to the grocery store instead of me are things I look forward to.
So now, did you have to cut in front of a bunch of 65-year-olds who are waiting there and you just stepped to the front of the line? How'd you pull that off?
No, I think you know how every state's doing it in a different way, but my niece registered everyone in the family.
Oh, wow.
And I think in Virginia, I don't know all the details behind it, but I think part of it is when you register as well as where you fall on the list.
Maybe I just need to pay closer attention. In Michigan, I saw a few weeks back, it's not until August that I'm scheduled to be there. So I've just kind of tuned it out. Maybe I need to tune back in.
Did you have a similar system where you register in some state on some state list?
Good question.
See, it's funny because they're definitely we have a colleague in the office that should be ahead of me on the list, but she didn't register until probably 2 weeks ago, and I registered 2 months ago thanks to my niece. So Sienna does not listen to this, but thank you, Sienna, for registering everyone. But yeah, wow. That's I am definitely looking forward to getting back to the office sometime soon. Yeah. I never realized how much I miss a commute.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's great to hear. Well, good topic today. So where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with talking about, and we've talked about this being a subset of values-based investing. And one thing I had asked you before we started recording that I'll ask again is I'd asked, is that the proper term? Because I've heard of socially responsible investing. And let's just start there, because I think there is a lot of subcategories and a broader base. But values-based investing, and tell me if you've heard or read or feel differently, but that is the now more popular term for socially responsible investing. Is that correct?
No, I don't think that that's the case. I think socially responsible investing was the original term.
Okay.
And how we retrace the history is always a little interesting, and some people started a little earlier, some people a little later. But I would say it was probably in the 70s when apartheid in South Africa was a big concern, and so were a few other issues at the time, including nuclear power and nuclear weaponry, and there was all sorts of things that were sort of stirring the public consciousness at that point in time. And so I think the first instance of at least measured or recorded shareholder advocacy around some of these topics was when a group of Episcopalians in the United States went to GE and said, hey, we're shareholders, and we'd like to have you disengage from your involvement in South Africa, which showed that, did I say GE? I meant to say GM, General Motors.
Okay.
And General Motors responded to that invitation, or at least request on the part of those shareholders. And so that, even though there was a faith-based motivation, but it was also a social motivation, it came to be known in those days as socially responsible investing, as the broad and new thing. And then over time, I think it has just branched out into different areas. The current term that seems to be the most popular now is as you used already, the ESG, environmental social governance categories, because I think it seems as though it's allowing the conversation to take somewhat more specificity, and it's not focused narrowly on the conscience, although it certainly is for many people rooted in conscience. It's also, there are now those that would say this is about more than conscience. This is also about performance. If there are certain risks that are derived from bad corporate policy on the environment, or on, just go through the ESG, bad corporate policy on certain social aspects or certain governance aspects, then can we indeed measure where those risks are present? Does that pose, in fact, a threat to the stability of the investor experience with that? In other words, some people could say, I don't really care about the value motivation for it. All I care about is whether or not these measures are indeed consequential for me as an investor, and look at, therefore they can look at them in strictly performance terms. But I do think that for most people, it is the values that's driving it. They'd like to see it also result in good performance, and finally, it's larger than E, S, and G as concerned. So, for example, I come much more from a faith perspective, where I would say certainly environment is important, certainly social welfare is important. So would be I guess I would say, well, probably less. There's a preoccupation somewhat less with governance, but certainly, if we can see an impact on a variety of other areas that are destructive to, avoiding certain areas that are destructive to human welfare, and then promoting or investing in things that are beneficial to human welfare, then that seems as though it's consistent with a faith perspective. So, but anyway, today we're not talking about that faith-based arena so much as just this more sort of, I would say, current and sort of like at the top of the conversation is the ESG side of things.
Yep, and
that's a great way to start off. You can go ahead, Roshan.
Well, I was going to say, let's just start. To me, the area that we should start in is just literally a simple definition. So ESG, those three letters stand for environmental, social, and governance, looking at corporate governance. And some of the areas or categories that will fit under each of these, just to name a couple: environmental, or things like climate change, air and water pollution. Social are looking at data protection and privacy, gender and diversity, and then governance on the corporate side is looking at board, audit committee, compensation, executives not getting these compensation and perks that are just way above and beyond what the typical employees are. So those are just some of the general categories. And Adrian, please, I'll let you begin. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I think this is a great starting point. I really like where this discussion is going. And like you said, it's broken down, and there are some overlap with different terminologies, but they all focus on values, beliefs, having sometimes your investments reflect your standard on life, whatever it may be. And it also is very company specific sometimes. Like if you're a mining company, for example, you may be focused more on your footprint in the environment or safety issues with your employees. If you're a technology company, a big thing is data privacy. That's huge, and security for your customers and clients, whatever it may be. If you're a retailer, a big thing with retailers is their supply chain. That's an extremely important thing. Are they also giving back to maybe some of the communities that they're outsourcing to? It's all becoming a conversation that people want to have more and more today. And I like the example you gave earlier, Erik, about like the shareholders kind of having that discussion or that meeting with certain like executives or management, because that's extremely important now. People want to make sure that they're investing sometimes in line with their values and beliefs. It's extremely important. And there's also been a little bit of a shift. You can see it today where a few years ago it was very big on environment, like companies focusing on the environment, not polluting, making sure they're doing the best when it comes to waste management or whatever it may be. And I'd say within a year, it's kind of also companies are shifting their focus on the social aspect of it due to the COVID crisis, making sure that employees are taken care of and they're having their best interests looked out for. There's also the issues with racial inequality as well, where companies a few months ago were posting on social media and reflecting their kind of their stance on it. It's becoming more and more of a discussion and conversation because, again, these are good topics for companies to talk about because there could be future risk aspects as well that could affect their businesses. So them having that conversation, kind of looking at their business strategy or whatever it may be, and implementing these new what they could be progressive ideals, they could be new strategies, whatever it may be, but having these in place so that when investors are investing their money or they're looking for new opportunities, that it's reflecting some of their different values and beliefs. I think it's a really important aspect. And another thing I find interesting too is also the equality aspect when it comes to management, because that's extremely important when you're talking about a return on equity and really connecting with your consumer or your clientele base, making sure that all aspects of their lives are also being reflected within their company and having that discussion. So these are all great points and examples that we can discuss today as well.
Yeah, wow, that was so much in there as far as what you covered so much in an area I almost don't even know where to start with that, Adrian. Wow. Let's look at that. Those different categories. Or actually, Erik, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Sure.
Can you take the lead? Where do you start with something like this? I imagine someone's coming to you in a meeting and they're saying, this is something that's important to them, taking their dollars and investing it using a values-based or ESG type approach. Where do you go from there?
Right. Well, it's often a two-way street in this conversation. So we're shifting the conversation to now thinking about sitting at the table with our clients and having a conversation about what's important to them. And sometimes the clients will raise that, and then sometimes we'll pose the question. So And it's interesting when clients who have thought about this realize, wow, we actually can get in, and if to the extent that a client's interested to do so, customize the portfolio and shape it around their investments, or shape their investments around their values. It's like a light bulb went off for them sometimes. Really, I don't have to resign myself to just being invested in a broad market capitalization weighted investment, but I can be selective about that. And so, just in certain terms of some of the tools, you guys have you use Morningstar Advisor tools in your practice, do you not?
Yes.
Yeah. So you've seen this before. So I'll just tell this story. So I had this client who came in and said, "So would you be interested in having your a sustainable?" So that's another word that's sometimes used in here. I'll just take that as an aside. Morningstar's preferred term for this ESG, I think, is mostly sustainable investing. Yeah. So I'll use that interchangeably in here. So I said to this client, if there were certain things that you could exclude from your portfolio, and then certain things that you could include deliberately that you'd like to advance with your investments, what would those be? And she said, well, in my case, I think the thing that I'd really like to exclude would be fossil fuels. And so we went into that tools that Morningstar makes available and went through and examined whether it was exchange-traded funds, mutual funds, or otherwise, what percent of involvement did they have in fossil fuel companies? And then any of them that were above a certain threshold, and I think in her case we went with 0 was the threshold, then they were out of consideration. And so then we just looked at, okay, what seemed to be the most effective money managers that are outside of that sphere? I have, and then we built a portfolio accordingly. And so then she, could feel great about that. But she came with that clear understanding about that. Other clients, I would say, haven't really given thought to that, because it's just never really been even brought to their attention that they could have a portfolio that reflects what they care about. And I think that's the exciting thing here for us is we can now have that conversation with clients and shape a portfolio that's much more meaningfully aligned with what they care about.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, that's great, Erik. And it reminds me of kind of like a similar discussion we have. There's kind of a little bit of similarity where we talked about it in a previous episode about risk tolerance, where there'd be an investor who says, "Oh, I'm more of an aggressive investor," and let's say the market pulls back or whatever it may be, and they have some losses that they're not comfortable with, and that kind of reflects the amount of risk capacity they can take on, and shows that they're maybe more of a moderate investor. And I draw kind of similarity in this case, where say you're trying to have your values maybe reflect more in your investment decisions, and you want to kind of construct your let's say a portion of your portfolio around that, and say it doesn't perform the best, but it is in line with your values and beliefs. So that may make you consider maybe going on an alternative route. Or let's say it does perform really well, and your values and your beliefs are being reflected in your investments and are performing really well. So that might show you, that might give you another example, another area to consider when you're investing, kind of a risk-reward trade-off and a value and performance trade-off, kind of looking at those relationships, just seeing what would be the best fit for your financial plan and your overall portfolio.
And, let's actually start there on the risk return, because I think a lot of people, well, I shouldn't put it on anyone else. I think definitely a way I would think about it is, first, am I going to be giving up something in terms of performance to do this? And if I am, that's okay. I just want to know, hey, how much am I going to be giving up in advance, right?
Exactly.
And so one thing that I found was interesting, and this is a little bit dated. It was a study done by Morgan Stanley between 2004 and 2018, and you actually had a similar return. They created an index that they called U.S. Large Cap Diversified Index, which looks at companies that they feel fit the criteria, and you actually had similar performance. So you can potentially do this and not give up performance, which I think is definitely a positive thing. Adrian, you mentioned risk tolerance. We focus on helping people retire, and sometimes you need that additional return, and maybe you can't afford to give up a return if you'd have to in this case. But it's nice to see that may not be an issue. You may have similar performance, and it's not. We don't have 100 years worth of data, but 2004 to 2018, it's a decent time period, and you do have a market cycle in there where you've had the markets decline and then come back. So I think it's a good amount of data to say, monitor the portfolio on an ongoing basis as we always do, but you may not have to give up anything on performance to pursue this kind of investment strategy.
Yeah, and we also had that discussion. It might help you sleep better at night knowing that you're getting the performance and your investments are reflecting your values and beliefs. It could really help you out and really, put some momentum going on in your life for sure.
I wish I had taken note of the precise numbers and who developed this study, but it was a recent study that was completed. It was actually a little bit even longer, Roshan, than the 14-year examination that you were just now reported. It was a 20-year study, and what it did is it said, what if you just went hog wild with all of the value screens? And I think they had said they applied 110 value screens. And as a result, taking out of the S&P 500, I think it was somewhere in the order of about 230 of the companies were eliminated by one or more of those value screens. So now you had only really the other 270 left. When you looked at that, particular, I'm distracted here by my phone going off. So can you hear
it? What's funny about this for the rest of us is Erik's got a checklist, and he literally went over it today with us and said, make sure your email's off, make sure your phone is off.
And I thought it was. Oh, fantastic. So this is brilliant. Maybe we can ask our guys to edit that.
Erik, anyway. Pick it up. I want to know.
No, it's done. But if it goes again, we're going to have to make an adjustment. So let me kind of start where I was before I got distracted. So back to these 270. Yes, there were periods in that 20-year journey where there was deviation in terms of, they weren't completely synced all the time, but it was literally down to the hundredth of a percentage point. That I think it was 6.19% compounded annual return from the beginning to the end for both of those. And in this particular one, the Erik, group...
Both of those being, what are the two you're comparing? The S&P and
the S&P 500 over this 20-year measurement period, and I can't remember when it precisely began and when it stopped, but over that precise 20-year measurement period, the S&P 500 had 6.19, if I recall, and this other group of the subset, the 270, that were, because 230 or thereabouts, were eliminated through the application of those 110 screens. They too had precisely down to that same hundredth of a percentage point, precisely the same compounded return over that period of time. Not always the same, sometimes lagging, but sometimes coming ahead. In other words, from a long-term investment standpoint, it appeared, at least from this study, that one wasn't going to gain, but one also wasn't going to forfeit by virtue of applying those value screens.
Yeah, and that is huge, right? Because oftentimes, at least one of my first thoughts would be, well, am I giving up something, right? And so if you can invest like this in areas that you just feel better about, like Adrian said, you sleep better at night knowing you have this, and you're not giving up anything performance-wise, that's a great place to be. We actually have a client we just started working with last year whose most important cause or focus is our vehicles, going to electric vehicles and getting off fossil fuels is a better way to put it. But because of that, he's invested primarily in the electric vehicle space. And part of it is luck and timing because that space has just done so well last year. But he has significantly outperformed in his portfolio with that over the last year. Now, a few months into 2021, he's definitely had volatility as well. But these areas I just think it's important that I keep going back to the point, or these are ways you can invest and you're not going to be giving up anything. You may be getting better sleep at night, as Adrian said.
Let me just weigh in on that just for a second too, because we don't know what the future is. We're just reporting a couple of studies that have looked back, and it very well could be the case that ESG-based or other sorts of value screens do actually provide better overall risk-adjusted, that's an important term, risk-adjusted performance, or they might provide worse. So we don't know that in advance, but at least it is interesting to see that from at least this couple of studies that we've seen, it wasn't a detriment. So I would say, though, that I have some clients that would say, are there things that will have a more, that are not just avoiding certain things, but that are actually, in other words, using those examples that we've already talked about, the fossil fuels, but are embracing certain things, like your client saying, hey, embracing electric vehicle technology and trying to make an advancement there. And we could in another podcast actually talk about the big world and the really growing world of what I would say faith-based investing, to talk about some of the things that they're both pursuing. There's some amazing stories on that side, and I tend to be more familiar with those, about some of the breakthroughs that have been made. But some people are saying, well, look, it doesn't bother me that much, even if there isn't all the return there, because I'm charitable. I give money. When I give $1, I lose that $1. So I have a 0% return on that $1, except for maybe the tax write-off that I get from it if if it's above my standard deduction and I get to itemize a bit. Yeah. So why would I be profoundly unhappy if I was able to accomplish similar good, but actually retain that $1 and get a return on it? It might not be equal to the return that I'm getting in my non-values-based portfolio, but it's certainly a better return on the $1 if I had instead given it away. So this is another way for me to express my intention to sort of better the world, rather than merely being a giver. I can also be an investor at a concessionary rate that I understand going into it. It is in concessionary rate.
Well, my point was, it doesn't have to be, right? Based on the data of the studies we've looked at, it doesn't have to be. And and to me, that makes this area available to everyone, right? Because if you're in a position where you need that return for your retirement, you might think, well, I can't take a concessionary rate. But my point is that, well, if your returns are similar, this is not just open for the people that are super wealthy. This is something anyone can do.
Well, it's true. I guess I would also just say a good way of asking this question for a client is maybe along these lines. Is there something that disturbs you so much, something out there in the world that you hate it really so much that even if you could make money from it, you wouldn't want to? Because in that case, it might be that there's some things where you find it's more than just a generalized desire to do good in the world. It's in fact a desire to avoid something awful. And so, for example, I think most people would agree if asked, what about child trafficking? If you could avoid investing in something that required child trafficking for its high profitability, high profit margins, would you?
Well, I'm laughing at that, because who comes into your office and says, "Hey, Erik, let me put $1,000 on child trafficking"?
Well, they don't quite say it like that. Here's how they say it. Yeah. And I have had these conversations, just as I've had those conversations where clients are really kind of excited by the conversation. Others are dismissive of it. And so I said, I had this conversation with a client. I'm really interested, I said, in a growing area of investment, which is direct private investment on both the debt and the equity side, in a category of this that falls within this larger discussion called impact investing. Is that something you've ever given thought to? And he said, yeah, I'm interested in impact if the impact is on my bottom line. But otherwise, and literally, I'm I'm quoting almost verbatim here. I don't care whatsoever if it helps somebody else. That's on them. And I thought, okay, that's a view. Not one that I think I would embrace, but I think, so maybe if I had said, are you sure about that? If, let's say, child trafficking were part of that conversation, what would you think about that? And maybe he would have answered differently. I don't know. But I do think that some people are just saying, no.
Yeah, to me, that's a total loaded question.
Who's
ever going to say to you? Who's ever going to say to you, I want to invest in child trafficking?
No one.
Come on.
But are they going to say, don't reshape my portfolio to avoid it?
I mean, this is why this seems kind of ridiculous to me. Would you agree with me that a lot of your clients, I don't want to put percentages, right, a lot of your clients are invested in large cap U.S. stocks?
Yes.
Those companies aren't putting money into child trafficking?
Well, I would say you're right. I know. But, well, okay. So, but we have international investments as well.
I'm just picking on your I'm picking on your example, right? Because
this is funny.
It's so
this is really funny because you are the master of the absurd extreme question.
I am.
And so here I'm just kind of trying to reciprocate a little bit, and I'm trying to show you some love and some respect. And what am I getting? Nothing but ridicule. Okay, so
I don't mean to ridicule at all. This is so absurd to me that it doesn't apply.
Okay. All right. Well, then let me.
I get your point, and I don't disagree with your point that looking into ways to make your money work for you is a good way to go. But that question to me is just so extreme. All right.
Let's go back to the original question then, which is.
Hold on. Let me actually. I want to finish this thought because I actually know where you're going. Can you describe that investment briefly? I know it doesn't necessarily apply to this episode, but you actually have an investment that you've discussed with clients that helps free people from child trafficking. It does apply for people that are listening, right?
Actually, have we talked about that?
Can you just talk about that a little bit so that people just don't think we're crazy and making fun of each other right now?
Yeah, happily. So this maybe we'll dive into this a little bit further in this one, if we come back to the topic of faith-based investing. But so there's a couple of guys, Americans, that are hearing about the fact that in the border regions of Myanmar, Laos, and Thailand, I can't remember the precise number, but I think the number that sticks in my mind from this, and it's been a couple of years since I heard it cited, is something around 25,000 children a year are sold by their parents into Thailand from those border regions, sold to these essentially child sex traffickers. And they're brought to child sex brothels in Thailand. And so this one woman who's a native of Thailand was walking from her village into a local town. We're not talking about even Bangkok. We're talking about a local town. Sees one of the doors open to this, and these children lined up to be selected from, and just moved and grabs three of them and hightails it out of there, thinking for sure she's going to get caught. But before she knows it, she runs and runs and runs and runs, and winds up that she has not been caught. And she went, wow, that worked. And so she repeated that process and just gathered more and more and more children, not really having a solution for it, but knowing that she couldn't allow that evil to persist. And so what these fellows, when they came out to do this region tour to understand, because they'd heard a little bit about this one's story, said, we want to help. And originally, their model was, we're going to go back to the United States and we're going to raise charitable gifts to come build a school and a residential camp for these children and help them get the education all the way through university educations in Thailand, so that they can enter this world, although with a terrible start, a very strong finish. So they went back to the United States and started doing this. They placed a phone call to get an update on her, and the number of children no longer was the 30 that had been there when they visited. It was 60. And they realized this is not going to work by charity.
Yeah.
So as a result, they said, wow, the only answer to this is business. And so they started 3 businesses, but 2 in particular that were relying on resources from that area, one of which was a shoe company And I'm not going to mention the shoe company. I don't know. I just because I don't want this to get dinged. But they developed a shoe company that sells these shoes for like $125 a pair, $150 a pair, made entirely from natural rubber and natural cotton from that area. And that, along with two other businesses, one a beverage company and then one a tech company for people in the Bay Area, has just made it so that they are able, through the profits from that company, to combat this problem of child trafficking.
Yes, and it's a great, and it gives good returns for investors as well.
It's market rate returns. Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an incredible story, Eric. I mean, it really shows. I mean, you'd have to do a little bit of research, but there are ways, if you look hard enough, to be able to give some of your assets or invest areas that you really want to make a change, or that you're passionate about, or you really want to help. I think that's a really great example. There, you have to do a little bit of digging or doing some research, but there are ways that you can invest. There are ways that you can help certain businesses to help out in areas that you're passionate about, or you want to make a difference in the world. I think it's really good. And I like this kind of theme we're drawing in this episode. It's kind of looking at numbers and looking at values and showing how they're different from everybody, and trying to find basically that medium for you, what works, what doesn't work. I think is a great conversation that we would love to have with any of our listeners. I think would be really great.
Yeah, and Eric, didn't mean to pick on your question.
Oh,
I just
totally
felt like
fine.
I felt like that one, it's a good investment, and two, the background context adds a lot to the story.
Yes, it really
to the question as well.
It really does. Yes, it does.
I thought this was going to turn into the battle of the ESG debate. Like, how can you have a battle over the environment, social, and governance?
Quit polluting. No, don't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, let's continue on. I've got a few areas where I want to talk about some just give people some not specific funds or anything like that, but to give an idea of what's out there to invest in this space. And I think that also will spark a little bit of a debate. But before we go into that, are there any things you wanted to add with what ESG investing is, or some areas or to think about for anyone considering the space?
Well, I guess
one area, there's one area I think that's very big where it's kind of becoming a little bit better, but there's more data out there now where it comes to tracking companies on how they give back, or certain goals that they want to achieve in order, whether it's their impact on the environment or their stance on social issues, just tracking that. I think like the biggest conversation, or the biggest thing people look into is looking at different businesses or companies, looking at their policies and procedures, and comparing that to their real-time behavior. I think it's a really good starting point, because there are certain businesses, certain companies, not a lot, but there are some cases where they have certain policies and procedures where it looks good on paper, or it's on their website, but it's not really reflected in their real-time actions or what they're doing in today. So look at certain databases, definitely do your research, and I think that's an extremely important area, because it is sometimes really hard to track how much they're really giving back, or are they really just checking off certain boxes, is also another discussion worth having, another conversation to have, or when you're looking to invest in any particular business.
Yeah, I guess I would say to build on your point, Adrian, that it's in a state of development, this whole conversation, and the measures and agreement about what measures really are the correct measures, or at least the useful measures. So you have a lot of different people developing a lot of different systems for measurement. And so one of the efforts over the last year in particular has been to say, could we please get all on the same page when we use terms about what we're trying to measure? Could we please be measuring the same things? And then if we can at least get some coherence on that level, at least on the definitions, on the language that we're using, then we'll be in a much better place to collaborate on a lot of this. But I think it's important for our listeners to understand that the industry as a whole is really not waiting for all of those definitions to be resolved, and they're pressing ahead with the development of products. And Adrian, maybe you're going to, or Roshan, maybe you're going to get into this, but it's in particular, I think of BlackRock has done some big things in the area of developing ESG-based portfolios, and they're not alone in that, but certainly they're a prominent and a large player. And so when you start to see some of these, the big institutional money managers moving in this direction, you know that it's ready when it's ready for those people to embrace. Then I think it's ready and available in a much more direct way for investors to put that to work without having to become research hounds themselves.
Yeah, it definitely is, and that's where I'm going to start when we get into some of these company names, just to discuss a little bit of them. But before I shift over to that, anything to add on the definition or areas you can go into? Nope. All right, let me start there. So one of the ones that I looked at, just because I was familiar with it already and have looked at it with clients before, is there's you mentioned BlackRock. It's actually an ETF by them that they have, but there's an index out there. So not recommending it or not, it's just a methodology that you can use. The KLD 400 Social Index. Adrian, I know you and I have talked about this before. Erik, I'm sure you're familiar with this as well.
I've heard of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's read
just
the
one of the
parameters
methodologies
that they use for the screen.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I'm getting at. The parameters, that's just one. There are also a bunch of mutual funds in the space that have different parameters for what they invest in that will consider themselves ESG. Years ago, I had a client that wanted to look into this, and we looked at balanced funds, and it turned out they had like 20% of their portfolio in U.S. Treasuries, and that client said to me, I don't believe the U.S. government is socially responsible, so rejected that as an investment idea. I just bring that up because as you select these things, if you're really passionate about a specific thought or an idea, you may want to look a little bit deeper into the holdings. So I looked at the social index to look at the holdings on here, and once again, not for or against, but I just noticed that one of the top holdings that they had in the portfolio. I'll give you the number one and number two names and get some of the top names on the list. But we've got Microsoft as number one, being the biggest position in the portfolio. Any thoughts on if you were an investor investing in this space? Would you have any reason to say, well, I don't know about investing in Microsoft? No. I didn't necessarily see any complaints in there. I'll tell you one where I have seen it though is further on the list. We've got Visa and MasterCard, and I talked to a client about that, and I had their response being, well, I'm not a fan of credit cards. I think they take advantage of people, so on and so forth. Not that you would feel the same or different. And this is another name that I've seen in the news recently a lot. It wasn't on the KLD. It was another fund that held it, and I just found it as interesting. I wish I could find the specific index that was using it, but Facebook was on the list. And once again, I don't know enough about the space, but I have a lot of people say things like, well, I think social media is the downfall of society, right? Or why do these companies get to say what you can and can't post, and so on and so forth? So it becomes a freedom of speech issue. So I'm just naming some of these companies, to make the point that make sure if you are investing in this space that you're actually putting your money where you want, just by looking deep. If you pick a mutual fund, take a quick moment to look at some of the top holdings. Because if they don't meet your criteria, you can also, quote unquote, build your own mutual fund and just select the holdings that you feel fit. But second, I just wanted to see if either of you had any experience, thoughts, or feelings when you looked at some of the names within these that you said, well, either you personally thought, well, I don't know if they fit, or you had clients that said, well, I don't necessarily agree with some of these names, so I don't know if I'd want to invest in that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess I would say I've looked at some of the large cap growth funds in particular. It's almost unavoidable that they're going to be invested in big tech. And I do feel like, from not everyone shares this vantage point, but I do have concerns about privacy. I do have concerns about speech. And so at that level, at least, I think we are moving into a new period. But of course, we're 13 years since the development of the iPhone. And so a lot of things have emerged during that period that we thought our rules and understandings of business and its role in society, were thus and so, and I think we're still trying to figure out some of that stuff. But I would say when I look at some of those large cap growth funds and I say you have all these things in there, is that really in alignment with what you're trying to accomplish? I don't know.
Yeah, and if you're, I mentioned that one client that really is against fossil fuels, and we helped him build what I call the equivalent of his own fund. He's got a diversified mix of holdings that are in there on his own, but because no mutual fund that was out there would really meet his needs exactly, right? So doing this construction on its own was necessary in that case. So when you're looking at the this space in general, there are solutions for the investor of some of these funds. And if you want to get into a fund that's already out there and exists, I would just encourage you take a quick minute to look at the holdings just to make sure you are comfortable.
So on that note, I guess I would say that I earlier referenced these tools that are out there to help you do that screening, and I mentioned one from Morningstar, but that's by no means the only one. There are many other tools that are available for this purpose. But I would say you want to think about is the fund or the ETF, that you're looking at, is it only accidentally in alignment with your values? Does it just happen to be that at the moment when you did the screen, they then did not hold something, but it wasn't because they had applied the value screen that you applied. It was just that they didn't for other reasons didn't think that particular investment opportunity had merit enough to be in their portfolio. And you might invest in that tool, and then 6 months later they do some repositioning in the portfolio, and now just in the same way that they were accidentally in alignment with your values previously, now they're no longer. In fact, they're directly antithetical to your values. So I think it helps to further understand whether or not the managers have made an explicit commitment to the set of values that you're hoping to see reflected in your portfolio.
Yeah, are they there at one point, or your views may change over time as well, right? So that's where, in general, because of what we do, I think sometimes we may even take for granted that people review their portfolios. But I've definitely met people who set up. I remember meeting this woman who set up her investments in her 401k. It was actually a TSP. She's a federal government employee. She set it up the day she started working there, and we're talking to her upon her retirement, and she never looked at it in between. Right, so you definitely want to see if the methodology that the investors are using may line up, or if you have a shift in your views, or if that portfolio has shifted and no longer aligns with your views. So you may want to continue viewing it or looking at what those holdings are. And Erik, where I thought you were going at this as well, but I'll mention is you had said, did they happen to fit your values? You were referring to the portfolio. I find that to be the case with some of the investments within these funds, right? Like, for example, you'll tend to see a lot of tech names in there, right? And it's is a tech company going to have a higher score on ESG just based on what they do versus an oil driller, right? Of course they will. They're going to be in there. So you may just need to make sure these things line up and they don't just happen to fall in the fund, that they actually align with your views.
That's really interesting, because if you think downstream a little bit, think of all the data centers that big tech maintains, and how are those things powered, and
electricity.
To what extent are they relying on, since I think roughly half the power in the United States is derived from fossil fuels, and most of that I think is coal, then I do wonder, is it in fact that maybe some of the ones that have the appearance of being pristine, in fact, because of the enormous amounts of power that's necessary to drive their business model, are they in fact perhaps quite a bit less pristine than they appear at first glance?
Yeah, you know what? I've just recently seen articles going after Tesla and Bitcoin, saying they're both bad for the environment because of the amount of electricity they use. Now, aside from reading these articles, I haven't done extensive research, so I have no opinion. I'm not saying that either of them are negative for the environment,
Right,
but
sure.
I had never heard or seen that argument until I'd say within the last week or so. Right, it's just an interesting point where if you had asked me literally weeks ago, is Tesla? Would you consider Tesla like a good company in the ESG space? From what I knew, I'd be like, they would be. They're helping get rid of pollution, from cars and so on. But then if you look a little deeper, that might not be the case. So,
well,
we tend to give people a lot of homework, I guess, on some of our episodes.
So one of the areas that we, as advisors, will often explore with our clients is the area of private investment, both on the equity and on the debt side. And so have you been having conversations with your clients at all about impact versions of those private investments?
Not so much. I've looked into them very briefly, but I haven't really found any that I just absolutely loved at this point. But that's also a growing space. So I imagine that when I find one, I will. And this is not specific to ESG, but just that private space in general. It's got to be a really good deal for me to feel comfortable with losing the liquidity.
Yeah.
And with how well the public markets have been doing recently, it's been hard for them to outperform or in line with it in general in the private space, not necessarily specific to the private ESG space or impact space.
Yeah, I can see that. So the reason I mention that is I do think that there is one of the most exciting developments in all of this, for me at least, is what I see as several groups trying to gather around and network so that they can more readily communicate to investors what some of these private investment opportunities are on, again, both the equity and on the debt side. And it's hard to ferret them out, but I think it's getting easier. So I'm glad for that.
Yeah, and they're not only is it getting easier to find, I think there are just so many more opportunities, right? I'd never, these private investments that are focused on the ESG space, I'd never heard of one 10 years ago, right? And now you're seeing more and more, and they are ready for the regular investor. I think maybe that was part of it. Before there were just fewer of them and they weren't ready for regular and when I say regular investor, I mean beyond the friends and family fundraising phase.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
So I'm again not going to mention funds or fund names here, but just there is a fund family that I really look to for some of the interesting things that they're doing that support and are aligned with my clients' values. And they recently announced an impact fund. So in other words, since they recognize that it is hard for people to do this sort of impact investing, what they've developed now is a fund specifically dedicated to impact investments. And so people know going into it that this is a different animal. It's using the vehicle of what we call a 40 Act fund, or more commonly a mutual fund. It's using that vehicle but to provide a wider audience of investors with an opportunity to make those impact investments. But there's no representations on the part of this that it's going to behave like or perform like more conventional funds that they might have been invested in. So I'm watching it. I haven't been recommending it, don't have any money in it yet, but I'm just intrigued by this particular development, because this really seems to me like it's outside the norm to really be focused, a public fund available, but making, or at least including, private investments of that kind.
Yeah, that is. I don't know of any others in the impact space, but I have seen those develop probably over the last 5 to 10 years or so in real estate and in private business lending. So yeah, it is. There is a system built for that, and I think it'll be a good. I think it's good when you have these things expand. Part of it is there's more choice out there, so it ends up being more research on your end as an individual. Yeah. But the fact that opportunity is available now, that it just wasn't before, is a good advancement.
Yes.
Yeah, Roshan, and there's another part of it too. It's kind of like a trend or things people are considering, like in the future, is just seeing just the inflow of how much money is really going to be going into these ESG space. So I think there's like going to be trillions of dollars going to be passed down or inherited from generation to generation. So just seeing where this money inflows, whether some of these new investors are more focused on ESG or impacting investments, or really just having their money line up with their values, is also going to be interesting how the markets sort of react to that, and different investments do over time. I think is going to be a really interesting thing to follow.
Yeah, and gentlemen, do you have any other closing thoughts to add?
Well, I guess I would just say, if our listeners are thinking that sounds really interesting and you'd like to learn more, I mean, we can certainly direct you to some resources. We've highlighted a couple of names in here, including Morningstar. But if you're thinking it's more than a research project that you're looking for, and you'd like to explore, what would a portfolio designed around what you care about look like, we certainly can have that conversation with you, and you can find our information in the show notes.
Yeah, we're always here to help. Thank you very much for listening. Adrian, Erik, and I are happy to help. We're taking on clients, and anything from helping expedite your research project into which funds make sense and if this is right for you, to the extreme of building that individualized, what I was calling like mutual fund portfolio, a private mutual fund of your own, so to speak, so it focuses on what is most important to you. We can help with the entire spectrum of those areas. And to all of our listeners, again, thank you very much. This has been another episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show. We will be back to help you on your retirement journey next week. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends, give us 5 stars, and we'll be back to you next week. This has been another episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show.